conversation expose beyond thinking, beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. He's a chronic illness mentor living with a common variable immune deficiency, podcast host, and of course, an author as well. None other than Dr. Jeffrey Bone. Welcome, Dr. Jeffrey on Abstract Essay. And can you please introduce more about yourself and us?
Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for having me on today. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Bone. I'm a chronic illness mentor. And my history is ultimately that I was working as a therapist for many years inside of a very moldy office, in a black mold office. And from that experience, I developed a very severe medical condition called common variable immune deficiency. Now, historically, I have my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate all in psychology, and I was working as a therapist up until that time, and things dramatically changed once illness entered into my life.
And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Dr. Jeffrey. Thank you. And today let's talk about the writing process of all your books. You've spent 2 decades helping clients reclaim their stories while simultaneously living your own illness narrative. When you sit down to write, which voice speaks first? The clinician or the patient, or how do you negotiate between them?
Well, it's really starting with the patient within me. I am the patient. I've never written ever about any patient ever in my entire life. I don't find that to be very compelling because those are their stories. And for decades and decades, I've sat across individuals listening to other people's story. I mean, really not cultivating my own story. And once everything fell apart, once the illusions of life fell apart, and I was just not able to function the way that I had been, my body began to betray me in very confusing, bizarre ways. Even the doctors had great difficulty being able to understand me. And it took many, many doctors for me to be able to find the right diagnosis. And so there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of confusion in that time, but through all that chaos, I had a story to tell. I had something to say, and I thought the best way for me to tell my story was not to sit across from somebody else and just share my story with a therapist, because that's a life that I've lived on the other side for decades. And instead, I found these other outlets that worked well for me.
Very well said, Dr. Jeffrey. As a psychologist, you train to maintain therapeutic boundaries. How do you cross the boundary when writing you from your own lived experience, and what happens to your clinical voice when it becomes personal?
Well, the boundary is that the boundary is between the patient and then the individual that may be sitting across from me, and I am always never telling their story, and so that there aren't any HIPAA violations or anything of the sort, because the story is only for lived experience. And to be honest, there isn't really a separation between just the sense of self and the sense of I that exists kind of within me and the clinical self, because I've been existing within that world for decades, and that they're all, it's kind of like the movie with Tom Hardy and Venom, where they kind of all mix together. So I can't neatly separate out, oh, here's the clinicians, here's Dr. Bone, and here's Jeff. They're really two sides of the same coin, and it all gets mixed into the same soup of creativity and writing.
Interesting, Dr. Jeffrey. In clinical work, we examine our own reactions to client stories. When writing your poetry or in journals, how do you distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to countless clients whose stories shape your understanding?
Sure. I speak and I write from a place of pain, from a pain that is my pain, is a pain of self ownership and really confusion as I'm going through these dark nights of the soul by myself. And so it isn't a construction of these other people's stories and their own personal mythologies of how they've organized their life to make sense of their life, because that's a little bit of what I've assisted with, of trying to make sense of chaos. But when chaos comes to my doorstep, I then have to organize that chaos. Essentially, it becomes this life that's like a pane of glass, and it falls over and it shatters into a million pieces. And then the writing process becomes, how do I make a mosaic out of that, out of the shards, out of the brokenness of me, that makes sense to the world, that maybe I can provide language, I can provide metaphors, similes, I can provide some sort of insight where other people could recognize themselves in my writing. But when it comes down to it, I know my pain very well, my physical pain, my emotional pain, my existential pain. And I know what's me and I know what's them. And I speak from a place of them, or I speak from a place of me, because I know, because I get that cathartic release. I get that place of being able to share something that's deeply personal about me. And that's the benefit of it. That's the benefit of the writing experience for me, as it's transformative of being able to find my sense of me within the storm.
Hmm, interesting. Dr. Jeffrey, you've spent decades witnessing others' suffering, and you also live inside your own. Does writing from inside change how you witness from the outside and vice versa?
It does change my experience, because they will speak of times when there are frustrations with the doctors, there's frustrations with, the front office, there's frustrations with the pharmacy, and there's a certain loneliness that comes with chronic illness. And I could understand that in the past abstractly, I could empathize with that, and it would make sense to me. But now it deeply resonates, because now I know what it's like to have the frustration. I know what it's like, because when I walked into more than one doctor's office with my undiagnosed primary immune disorder, I was just labeled as, oh, you know what? I can't make sense of this. So this must be anxiety. And they were telling the psychologist, hey, I think you have anxiety. And I know my anxiety and I know that well. And that's not what was on the table at that time. I was dealing with a very severe medical condition that they weren't able to label, so they labeled me as psychosomatic. Now, of course, that turned out not to be true when they did the right blood work, but the difficulty of navigating the maze of healthcare, especially in the United States, because that's the healthcare system that I'm familiar with, it can be very frustrating. It can be very fragmenting. It can be very, very disappointing, because they'll look at you in a very narrow lens and not holistically. And I can understand those journeys from those people, not as some sort of, oh, I read it in a book. Oh, I went to a seminar and I heard about people like you. No, I was people like you. And so I come from it as being a member of the tribe of those with chronic illness. And I know what the tribe is. I know what the tribe is to treat those individuals, and I know what it is to be in the box itself.
Indeed. So, Dr. Jeffrey, after 2 decades of clinical work, you might assume you understand the terrain, but living with CVID, does it humble your clinical assumptions in the ways that find their way onto the page?
Well, it does humble me, because it illustrates a lot of what we don't know. And we don't know a lot. And it's, when it comes down to it, we tend to kind of throw out labels, but do those labels really capture what's really going on? And oftentimes it doesn't. They are guesses. And we have to be humble. We have to be in a place where we have to recognize the most powerful phrase that we can use is I don't know. And I often write from a place of I don't know. When I sit down and I write a poem, I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know what the next line is going to be. I don't know. I may have a first word, a first idea. I may have something as simple as, a garden, and that may just be the idea. And then I just allow myself. And it's a process of allowing that creativity, allowing that voice to emerge, and allowing it to speak when I may not cognitively, have the words where I could express it to you because I may not necessarily know. But when I allow myself to write, sometimes I find places. It's like going into the darkness with a flashlight and being able to explore.
Very well said. Dr. Jeffrey, you've written a poetry collections, an immune disorder themed coloring book, a guided journal, as well your host as a podcast. How do you decide which genre in particular piece of truth belongs in, and what truth can only live in one form?
Well, the genre is that I like the work of, Kierkegaard. In Kierkegaard, it says that freedom is dizzying. And I love the idea of the dizzying aspect of freedom, where I believe that I have free will. And I have free will to be able to, explore. And that I don't have to be beholden to any one particular genre. I've yet to write a novel. I've yet to write a play. Yet to write a song. And maybe those things may emerge. And so wherever my interest is sparked is where ultimately I end up following. At first, it was poetry, and poetry worked very well because I have ADHD and I don't have the patience, honestly, to sit down and just write for months and months on end for a novel. But I could write in these short little snippets and it would kind of make sense. And from writing that, I felt that I had that cathartic release. Those two books gave me the benefit of what I wanted to release out into the world. But through that process, I would be on different websites and social media sites, and oftentimes they would have these prompts. They would give you a prompt and you would write from the prompt. And I found that to be very helpful to be able to kind of guide my creative process. They weren't writing the poem for me, but they were poking me a little bit, kind of encouraging me a little bit. And I'm like, I wonder if I could do that for other people who are going through this. And then that is what gave birth to the idea of writing a chronic illness journal, where from an existential perspective, when we look at the four main tenets of freedom, isolation, death, and meaning, we have these multiple chapters where I provide multiple prompts to be able to encourage someone to be able to find their own voice. And instead of just handing someone a blank book of pages, it's just, oh, write out your ideas and your beliefs. I gave them a little bit of a suggestion on where to go, what to explore, what to think about. And that would make it a little bit easier for them to be able to find their own voice. And then absurdity. I love absurdity. I love Albert Camus and I embrace absurdity. And I just was flipping through, some sort of social media site and they mentioned, coloring books. And I'm like, I wonder if I could do that. So there was a little spark in there. And the coloring books, that's just born out of fun. Now, I have to infuse medication. That's where the first one is about infusions. It's called Healing Lines. And then the other two, the Healing Horizons, that's about depression and anxiety. And then To the Bone, that's about living with chronic pain. It also has a reflection for you to think about as you're kind of coloring in this image that I provided. But really, I was just trying to have fun with it. I was just trying to have fun with it. So it started off with the most serious, heartfelt tears of poetry. and it trickled down into me having a good time making coloring books.
Hmm, that's amazing, Dr. Jeffrey. Speaking of the coloring book, it's about immune disorders is an unexpected choice. What made you think this belongs an image for someone to color rather than in words for someone to read?
Because I was looking at it from my own perspective. When I write poetry, I don't look into the world and I don't think, oh, what does the world, what do I need to describe about the world? When I think about a poem, I think about myself. I look inwards into myself. I write about what I know. I write from the lens of me. And so when I was looking at the idea of a coloring book, I thought, well, no, it's, what could I use, for my own journey? Because I do these subcutaneous infusions with immunoglobulins at home. So I don't go to an IV center. I have two needles and I stick the needles into my abdomen. And over the course of about an hour, I infuse in this medication. And so I was thinking, what would be something that I could use in this moment? So I enjoy coloring. It's kind of a form of mindfulness meditation, and we don't tell people it's meditation because we don't want to scare people away from it. But it's a form of mindfulness meditation where they can dive into something as
Very well
reference.
said.
The frame of reference was my own personal experience.
Dr. Jeffrey, a guided journal is a part author, part reader, part empty space. How do you design the silence between your prompts? How much structure you provide, and how much emptiness do you leave for the reader to fill?
I believe that there is no perfect answer to that question, and I believe that I give them a few pages to write, but I also encourage them to find other notebooks to write in for them to expand upon. And I also give multiple prompts. So there may be a prompt, and they may write on that prompt for that particular section, but that may have taken up the entire space. And so I leave space open as a suggestion of here is open space to find yourself. But I also encourage people to be able to write and document on their own pages. They may want to write 20 pages on a single prompt when I may only provide 3 pages of space. And so it is a suggestion rather than a prescription to say, you must fill in this space. It's fine if they wrote a 3 line paragraph or a 3 line poem about it. That would be sufficient because I'm not here to tell them how to create. I'm here just to give them some empty space to create, but I also don't want them defined by that amount of space. They could use 10% of that space. They could use 100% of that space. They could write on the inside of the cover. That would be perfectly fine. However, whatever. And so at the end of the day, I'll never know what the other person needs. I just give a suggestion of space rather than a prescription of space.
Hmm, very well said. Dr. Jeffrey, poetry demands compression. When you've spent decades listening to the sprawl of human stories, how do you know how to cut? What single image can hold the entire illness experience?
I always try to say it as in as few words as possible, because if I give somebody a speech, they're not going to remember a speech. No one is going to remember the speech. We think of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. I have a dream. 99.9% of the people can't utter a single word other than that one phrase from that speech. We recognize the importance of it, but we remember, I have a dream. And so I always try to think about what are the fewest amount of words that somebody will carry with them, because I don't want to, my goal is to be brilliant or to be creative or to be impressive. I care about none of those things. I care about one thing. I just care to be useful. And useful needs to be the smallest packet of information. There's a technique that I encourage people to use. It's called somatic tracking, and where we label the pain or anxiety as a safe sensation. This is a safe sensation. That's the exercise. This is a safe sensation. The fewest amount of words to tell a story, and that is always always my goal. And if I get to where there's fewest amount of words to make it easy for someone else to carry it, and so it's useful to them in their own lives.
Dr. Jeffrey, you help people reclaim their story, but reclaim from whom or from what? Is it from a medical system that reduced them from diagnosis or from the culture that demand toxic positivity?
I think it's both. Absolutely. Culture is a huge one because in our world, it is you're as valuable as you are productive. And all of a sudden, you're chronically ill and you're just not as productive. Well, does that mean that you're not valuable anymore? So you go into elements of culture and society, and what is worthiness, what is lovability, what is good enough. And so yes, we have a world where you come in to see the doctor and they'll give you an ICD-10 code, a DSM-5 code, and none of us are codes. That doesn't tell the whole story. It's a billing code. It's not the story of you. And so people knew the story of them. But the problem with that story, because I'm a big fan of Don Miguel Ruiz, is, who wrote the Four Agreements, is that story is a domestication of us as individuals. We're domesticated by society. We're told, from the early age of what it is to be successful, what it is to be someone who's important. And when we get hit with illness, all of the illusions, all the teachings, they all shatter. And so we need to find out through the individual's values. It's not my values, it's not what I believe. I'm not telling people what to think. I'm exploring what they think and what they believe in and what's important to them. So there's a lot of values work that occurs in that process.
Hmm. Interesting, Dr. Jeffrey. In your podcast, explicitly rejects motivational cliche and toxic optimism. How do you write about hope without failing into those traps? What the difference between genuine hope and counterfeit?
Well, we don't have to be just blindly happy about things, that we want to be honest. And honesty is always going to be the expansion. And I always like the image of the yin and the yang, that there is going to be black and white. There's going to be a little white in the black and a little black in the white. There's going to be good in the misery and misery in the good. And we want to be able to expand to tell the whole story. It's never, sometimes people will say, oh, I need to stop thinking negatively. And I say, no, 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 no. You don't have to stop thinking negatively. That's not the goal here. There is wisdom in the negative, there's honesty in the negativity. We don't need to stop talking negatively, but we need to stop only talking negatively. I'm always in the place of expanding the story rather than cutting out pieces of who we are. I'm a believer. There's a book called, I don't use internal family systems, but there's a book called No Bad Pieces. No Bad Parts. I'm sorry, it's called No Bad Parts. And I'm a believer of that general idea that we don't have bad parts. The negative or the pieces about us that hurt, that don't feel so great, the goal is not to detox them. It's not to get rid of them. It's not, but it's to give them companionship with the quiet honesty of what is good, what is right, what is meaningful in their life. So it is not a matter of, okay, let's just be positive and happy about this and just put a smile on our face. No, we can have tears. People all the time say, oh, I need to stop crying. I'm like, no, don't stop crying. You're allowed to cry. Why can't you cry? It's a part of the human experience. And we never want it to be lesser. We don't want a lesser human experience. We want an authentic, real human experience. So toxic positivity, that's where from beginning to end, it's about positivity. And I'm about some positivity, some hope, but also some sadness, some grief, some despair, because I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if everything works out. I don't know what the story is. But we have to live it and move forward with the largest story possible so that we can stay cognitively flexible as we traverse this thing called life.
Very well said. Dr. Jeffrey, illness bring fatigue that reshapes cognition. Do you write differently when tired, shorter lines or different images, a different relationship to complexity? And do you keep those passages or revise them forward health?
I will write from fatigue, and I really don't want, the healthiest version of me to be editing the most ill version of me. I just because sometimes I'm full of hope in those brief little moments where I've had my Red Bull, I can have the wings of hope. But there are times when it's dark, it's uncertain, it's unhappy, and it's frightening, and I may be exhausted, I may be tired, but that's where I write from. I'll be honest, I've never written a poem when I've been in a good mood. It's never happened to me in my entire life. I don't know what that is. I don't write about butterflies and beautiful sunsets. I write when it hurts. I write when I need to flesh out something that it feels the grief, the uncertainty. Those are the things that I'm allowing space for. And I am not interested in taking the healthiest version of me and editing those into something that's maybe more socially acceptable. I want those parts to be able to speak, and most people can relate to those parts. And most definitely, the chronically ill individuals absolutely can.
Dr. Jeffrey, to wrap up our discussion for today, chronic illness means living with a different relationship to time. How does that proximity to limitation show up in your sentence structure, your lines breaks, your willingness to finish things or not?
Well, it provides a little bit of urgency for me. I have the condition that I have, a primary immune disorder, and my grandfather made it to 102. And I can promise you, I won't make it to 102, but I'm going to write as much as I can and to be as brave as I can with whatever time I have. So I can share something with the world that maybe can resonate with somebody else who's going through a difficult time.
Very well said, Dr. Jeffrey, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support all your books, your business, or whatever projects that you want to promote on Abstract Essay?
Well, thank you very much for having me on this podcast today, Daniel. Very appreciate your questions were extremely insightful, and you are wise. You're a wise man. So I greatly appreciate the time to be able to sit with an individual such as yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. So where do people can buy all your books?
The books can be found on Amazon.com. You can just type in Dr. Jeffrey Bone, or you can visit my website at drbone.live. That's drbone.live.
As well as your podcast, right?
Podcasts can be found on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple.
Yes, I have another podcast, Dr. Jeffrey, called Abstract Poetry. Can you be my guest over there and let's read some of your poetry?
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I would be happy to play a part in the story of your podcast and see if I can add something meaningful to it.
Definitely, you will add something, Dr.
Thank, 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 thank,
Jeffries.
thank, 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 thank,
And
thank, thank,
thank
thank,
you
thank, thank, thank,
so
thank, thank,
much
thank, thank, thank,
for your
thank, thank,
time.
thank, thank. Thank you and have a wonderful day, sir.
Maricon people, see you soon.